The massive alien ship hung in space like a dark metal mountain. Its hull stretched for miles, covered in sharp angles and glowing red lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside the command center, Commander Kethavar stood 8 feet tall on powerful legs, his black scales catching the light from dozens of control screens. His yellow eyes watched the small human ship approaching through the void. "They are so small," said Intelligence Officer Zexai, his voice a low hiss. He stood beside Kethavar, studying the readings on his scanner. "Their ship is barely the size of our smallest fighter craft." Kethavar's mouth curved into what passed for a smile among his people. His sharp teeth gleamed. "Perfect. This will be over quickly. How many worlds have we conquered now?" 47, Commander. Each one surrendered within 3 rotations of first contact. And this will be 48. Kethavar turned to face the large viewing screen that showed the approaching human vessel. It looked so fragile compared to his mighty dreadnought. "Have you studied their psychology reports?" Zexai activated his data pad with one clawed finger. "Yes, Commander. They are highly emotional creatures. They make decisions based on feelings, rather than logic. They form attachments to other individuals and will sacrifice themselves for these bonds. They fear death and pain. They should be easily controlled." "Excellent." Kethavar walked to his command chair, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet bridge. Around him, dozens of crew members worked at their stations, preparing for another routine conquest. Open communications when they arrive. The human ship came to a stop about a mile away from the alien dreadnought. It was a simple white vessel with blue markings on its side that read, "New Horizon." Through the viewing ports, small figures could be seen moving inside. "Communications established, Commander," reported the communications officer. "Put them on screen." The main display flickered and showed the interior of the human ship. 3 humans stood in what appeared to be their bridge. The one in the center wore a dark blue uniform with gold stripes on his shoulders. He had brown hair and looked to be in his middle years. His face showed signs of stress, but his eyes were alert. "I am Captain Jake Murphy of the Earth vessel New Horizon," the human said. His voice was steady despite the obvious tension. "We come in peace to establish first contact between our species." Beside him stood a woman with short blonde hair wearing a white coat over her uniform. Her eyes were wide as she stared at the alien bridge, taking in every detail. The third human was a man in a military uniform, his posture straight and ready. His hand rested near what was clearly a weapon on his belt. Kethavar rose from his chair and stepped forward so the humans could see his full, imposing height. He had used this same approach 47 times before. The sight of his massive form and predatory features usually caused immediate fear responses in new species. "I am Commander Kethavar of the Zephyrian Hegemony," he said, his voice deep and threatening. "You will listen carefully to what I say, humans of Earth." The 3 humans looked at each other, then back at the screen. The woman whispered something to Captain Murphy, who nodded. "We're listening," Murphy said. Kethavar began the speech he had given so many times before. "Your species has been evaluated by the hegemony. You have been found suitable for integration into our empire. You will surrender control of your world immediately. You will provide 60% of your planet's resources as tribute. You will supply 10% of your population to serve the hegemony as workers." He paused, waiting for the usual response. Most species began begging at this point, or making desperate offers to negotiate. Some tried to appear brave but failed as their fear showed through. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Captain Murphy's mouth began to twitch. The woman beside him covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders starting to shake. The military officer's stern expression cracked. Then Captain Murphy started laughing. It wasn't the nervous, hysterical laughter of a frightened being. It was genuine, hearty laughter, the kind that came from finding something truly amusing. The woman, Dr. Lisa Grant, according to the intelligence files, joined in. She actually wiped tears from her eyes as she laughed. Commander Rick Davis, the military officer, grinned widely and shook his head in apparent disbelief. Kethavar stared at the screen in confusion. In all his years of conquest, in all the intelligence reports he had studied, he had never encountered this response. Fear, anger, desperation, bargaining, even attempts at defiance, these were normal. But laughter, did they understand what I said? He asked Zexai quietly. Our translation systems are functioning perfectly, Commander. They understood every word. On the screen, Captain Murphy was trying to control his laughter. I'm sorry, he said, still chuckling. It's just, you're serious, aren't you? You actually expect us to just hand over our world because you asked nicely? Dr. Grant managed to stop laughing long enough to speak. Captain, I think they really believe this is how things work. They probably haven't met anyone who said no before. 10% of our population? Commander Davis added, his grin never fading. Do you have any idea how many humans that would be? We can barely keep track of ourselves as it is. The three humans looked at each other again and burst into fresh laughter. Kethavar felt something he had never experienced before. Uncertainty. His crew members exchanged confused glances. The psychological profile had been completely wrong. These humans weren't behaving like any conquered species should. Perhaps they don't understand the consequences of refusal, suggested Zexai. Kethavar decided to clarify. If you do not comply, we will take your world by force. We have weapons that can destroy your cities. We have ships that can block out your sun. We have conquered 47 worlds. None have ever successfully resisted. Captain Murphy's laughter finally died down, but his smile remained. Well, Commander Kethavar, I guess that makes us number 48 then. And just so you know, we've never been very good at doing what we're told, especially when someone tries to scare us into it. Dr. Grant nodded enthusiastically. Actually, the worse the threat, the more stubborn we tend to get. It's really quite fascinating from a psychological standpoint. We'll need some time to discuss your offer with our people back home, Commander Davis said, his tone polite but clearly mocking. I'm sure they'll find it as entertaining as we do. This is not entertainment, Kethavar roared, his patience finally breaking. This is conquest. Submit or be destroyed. The three humans looked at him with expressions that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and amused. You know what, Commander? Captain Murphy said. We'll get back to you on that. Thanks for stopping by, though. It's been really educational. The communication ended, leaving the alien bridge in stunned silence. Kethavar stared at the blank screen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. For the first time in his military career, he had no idea what to do next. Commander, Zexai said quietly. What are your orders? Kethavar didn't answer immediately. He was beginning to realize that these humans might be very different from any species they had encountered before. And for the first time in his life, that difference made him feel something uncomfortably close to doubt. The news of the alien contact spread across Earth faster than wildfire. Within 3 hours of Captain Murphy's return, every television station, radio broadcast, and internet connection carried the same incredible story. Aliens had arrived, and they wanted to take over the planet. President Amy Collins sat in the Oval Office watching the recording of the alien commander's demands for the 5th time. Around the large mahogany table, her advisors waited for her response. Secretary of Defense Paul Stevens leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face showing concern. Admiral Karen White sat quietly, her hands folded, thinking about the naval forces under her command. Play it again, President Collins said. The screen showed Commander Kethavar's imposing figure making his demands. When it finished, she shook, her head slowly. 60% of our resources and 10% of our people, she said. Do they have any idea what they're asking for? Madam President, Secretary Stevens said, 10% of Earth's population is almost 800 million people. That's more than the entire population of most countries. Admiral White spoke up. The question is, what's our response? Our intelligence suggests their technology is significantly more advanced than ours. President Collins stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see protesters already gathering on the White House lawn. But these weren't the panicked crowds she had expected. Many carried signs with jokes written on them. One read, "Aliens want our stuff. Get in line." Another said, "Come back when you have better demands." "Have you seen the public reaction?" she asked. Her press secretary, Maria Santos, pulled out her tablet. "It's unlike anything we've ever recorded, Madam President. Instead of panic, we're seeing massive amounts of humor. Social media is exploding with memes about the aliens. Late-night talk shows are having a field day. Jimmy Fallon's monologue last night got 30 million views." She showed them her screen. Hundreds of memes filled the display. One showed the alien commander with the caption, "When you try to conquer Earth but humans just make jokes about you." Another featured a picture of a typical suburban family with the text, "Sorry aliens, we're already owned by our mortgage companies." Secretary Stevens frowned. "This isn't a joke. These beings have the technology to destroy us." "Actually, sir," interrupted Dr. Helen Parker, the government's chief psychologist, "this might be exactly what we need. I've been studying the recording and I think our natural response confused them completely." Everyone turned to look at her. She was a small woman with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Explain," President Collins said. "Every species they've conquered probably responded with fear, anger, or desperation. Those are logical responses to a superior threat. But humans have a unique psychological defense mechanism. When faced with something absurd or threatening that we can't immediately fight, we make jokes about it. It's how we've survived everything from natural disasters to wars." Dr. Parker stood and began pacing. "Think about it. During the London Blitz, people made jokes about the bombing. During the Great Depression, comedy shows were more popular than ever. When we're scared, we laugh. When we're overwhelmed, we make fun of the situation. It's uniquely human." Meanwhile, thousands of miles above Earth, Commander Kethvar paced his command bridge. The human response had left him completely baffled. Intelligence Officer Zexhai approached with a data pad full of reports. "Commander, we've been monitoring their communications," Zexhai said nervously. "The results are unusual." "Show me." Zexhai activated the main screen. It filled with images and videos from Earth's internet. Thousands of jokes, cartoons, and funny videos about the Zephyrian demands. One video showed an elderly man in Montana named George Clark standing in his yard, looking up at the alien ships hovering overhead. "Well," George said to his neighbor while feeding his chickens, "they're not nearly as scary as that tornado we had last spring. At least these fellas asked politely before trying to wreck everything." Another video showed a group of college students at a Welcome Aliens party. They had decorated their dormitory with homemade alien costumes and signs, reading, "Thanks for choosing Earth, we hope you enjoy your stay." "What is this?" Kethvar demanded. "They appear to be celebrating, Commander. They're treating our ultimatum as entertainment." Kethvar's claws dug into his command chair. "Find me their leaders. Someone must be taking this seriously." Back on Earth, President Collins addressed the United Nations. Representatives from every nation filled the assembly hall, but instead of the panicked emergency session everyone expected, there was an odd atmosphere of determined calm mixed with occasional chuckles. "Fellow leaders," President Collins began, "we face an unprecedented situation. An alien force has demanded our surrender. They want most of our resources and millions of our people." She paused, looking around the room. "Now, I don't know about your countries, but Americans have never been very good at doing what we're told, especially by bullies." A ripple of laughter went through the assembly. The British Prime Minister stood up. "If I may, Madam President, the United Kingdom has some experience with unreasonable demands from foreign powers. We didn't give in to the Nazis, and we're certainly not giving in to these, what did they call themselves? Zephyrians?" More laughter. The French representative added, "They want 60% of our resources? My people would riot if I gave away 60% of our cheese alone." President Collins smiled. "The question is, what do we do about it?" General Stevens, who had been watching the proceedings with growing amazement, stood up. "Madam President, if I may suggest, perhaps we should show them what happens when you threaten something humans care about." Dr. Parker nodded enthusiastically. "From a psychological standpoint, their entire approach is based on intimidation. But you can't intimidate people who aren't afraid. And apparently, we're not afraid. We're amused." Above Earth, Kethvar received reports from his psychological warfare specialists, Mindrender Yisketh, a being trained in breaking the spirits of conquered peoples, stood before him with confusion written across his alien features. "Commander, our fear-inducing broadcasts are having no effect. We showed them images of destroyed worlds, testimonials from broken leaders, demonstrations of our weapons. The humans they're turning them into jokes." "What do you mean?" "They've created something called memes, using our intimidation materials. One shows our weapon destroying an asteroid with text that says, 'When you try to show off but humans aren't impressed.' Another uses footage of a conquered alien leader with the caption, 'When you realize humans don't scare easy.'" Kethvar felt something he had never experienced in all his conquests. The absolute certainty that had carried him through 47 victories was beginning to crack. "Sir," Zexhai said quietly, "perhaps we should reconsider our approach. These humans are different." "Different how?" "They're not responding to psychological pressure. In fact, they seem to be using our own tactics against us. They're making us look foolish." For the first time in his military career, Commander Kethvar began to wonder if the Zephyrian way of conquest might not work on every species. On Earth, the response was becoming clear. Humanity wasn't going to surrender, negotiate, or even take the threat entirely seriously. They were going to laugh at it, and somehow that laughter was beginning to feel more dangerous to the aliens than any weapon they had ever faced. Commander Kethvar stood on his bridge watching the small asteroid floating in space near Earth's moon. His frustration had grown into something approaching rage over the past week. The humans continued to treat his ultimatum as a joke, and his psychological warfare specialists had failed completely. "Target the asteroid," he commanded. "We will show these humans what happens when they refuse to take us seriously." The main weapon of the dreadnought powered up with a deep humming, sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. Energy collectors along the ship's sides began to glow with bright blue light. The weapon had never failed to impress conquered species before. "Weapon charged and ready, Commander," reported the weapons officer. "Fire." A beam of pure energy lanced out from the ship, striking the asteroid dead center. The space rock, roughly the size of a city block, simply vanished in a flash of brilliant light. Where it had been, only glowing particles of dust remained, slowly spreading through the void. Kethvar turned to his communications officer. "Broadcast this to the humans. Tell them this is what awaits their cities if they continue to resist." Within hours, the demonstration had been seen by every human on Earth. News networks played the footage repeatedly. The destruction was indeed impressive. The alien weapon had completely destroyed the asteroid in seconds. But once again, the human response was not what Kethvar expected. Dr. Tony Martinez sat in his laboratory at MIT, surrounded by computer screens and calculation boards covered in equations. He had watched the alien demonstration 17 times, taking measurements and making notes. His team of graduate students worked around him, analyzing every detail of the energy beam. "Fascinating," he said to his assistant, Janet Kim. "The energy output is enormous, but the delivery system is incredibly inefficient." "What do you mean, Professor?" Dr. Martinez pointed to his calculations. "Look at this. They're using some kind of plasma containment system to focus the beam, but they're losing at least 40% of their energy to heat dispersion. We could do the same thing with a fraction of the power using magnetic field guidance." Janet stared at him. "You're saying we could build a better version?" "Not better, cheaper, much cheaper." He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. "Send this to the Department of Defense. They'll want to see this." Within 24 hours, Dr. Martinez's analysis was on every major news network. He appeared on morning talk shows, explaining in simple terms how the alien weapon worked and how humans could improve on the design. "The thing is," he told the host of Good Morning America, "it's really just a big laser with some fancy focusing tricks. We've been working with similar technology for years. Theirs is more powerful, sure, but it's like they built a muscle car when they could have built a race car." The interview went viral immediately. Comments flooded in from viewers around the world. "Leave it to humans to watch an alien death ray and think we can do better," wrote one person. Another added, "Alien Commander probably watching this thinking, why did we pick these people?" Commander Kethvar was indeed watching, and his confusion was growing deeper by the hour. Intelligence Officer Zexhai approached him with yet another disturbing report. "Commander, the humans have done something unprecedented. They've reverse-engineered our weapon demonstration and published the results for their entire species to see." "What do you mean?" "This Dr. Martinez has explained how our plasma cannon works and suggested improvements. But that's not the worst part." Zexhai activated a screen showing footage from Earth. It showed human children at something called a science fair, displaying small working models of energy weapons based on the alien technology. "Their younglings are building versions of our weapons as educational projects," Zexhai said in disbelief. Kethvar watched a 12-year-old girl explain her project to a judge. "I used Dr. Martinez's equations to build a miniature plasma focuser," she said proudly. "It can burn through steel, but it only uses as much power as a microwave oven." "This is impossible," Kethvar muttered. "No species learns our technology this quickly." The situation got worse when Commander Rick Davis contacted the alien ship directly. His image appeared on the main screen, and he was smiling that same confident smile that had infuriated Kethvar during their first meeting. "Commander Kethvar," Davis said politely, "we wanted to thank you for the demonstration. Very educational. We thought you might like to see what we've been working on in return." Behind Davis, Kethvar could see what looked like a human military facility. Technicians were moving around large cylindrical objects that were obviously weapons. "These are what we call nuclear fusion warheads," Davis explained casually. "Not as elegant as your plasma beam, but they get the job done. The nice thing about them is that they're relatively simple to build once you know how. We have several thousand of them." Kethvar felt something cold move through his chest. Nuclear weapons were primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, but they were still capable of destroying cities, and the humans seemed to have many of them. "But here's the interesting part," Davis continued. "We built these when we were afraid of each other. Now that we're not fighting among ourselves anymore, well, let's just say we have a lot more time and resources to focus on new projects." Screen switched to show another facility where humans were working on much larger weapons. Scientists and engineers moved between massive construction projects that Kethvar didn't recognize. "You should know," Davis added, "that Dr. Martinez's improved plasma cannon design went into production yesterday. We'll have our first working prototype by next week. Our version should be about 3 times more powerful than yours and cost about 1/10 as much to build." The communication ended, leaving the alien bridge in silence. Mind Render Yisiketh approached Kethvar cautiously. "Commander, this is unprecedented. In all our conquests, no species has ever responded to our demonstrations of power by immediately trying to surpass them. What do our psychological profiles say about this behavior?" "They say it's impossible, sir. Most species see superior technology and submit. Some try to fight with what they have and lose quickly. But humans see our weapons and immediately start building better ones. It's not logical." Kethvar turned to stare at the image of Earth on his screen. For the first time since beginning his military career, he felt something that might have been doubt. "Sir," Zexhai said quietly, "there's something else. We've been monitoring their global communications, and they're sharing all their new weapon designs freely with each other. Every nation on their planet now has access to these improved weapons. Why would they do that? According to their broadcasts, they want to make sure everyone is equally prepared to defend their world. They're treating this as a planetary defense situation, rather than individual nations protecting themselves." Kethvar processed this information slowly. Every other species the Zephyrians had conquered had been divided, with different groups, trying to make separate deals or fighting among themselves. But the humans seemed to be uniting against the common threat. "Commander," the weapons officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission from the humans." "Put it on screen." Captain Jake Murphy appeared, still wearing that amused expression that had haunted Kethvar's thoughts for days. "Commander Kethvar," Murphy said, "we've been thinking about your original offer. We discussed it with our people and we'd like to make a counter-proposal." Kethvar straightened, hoping finally for a reasonable negotiation. "We'll give you safe passage out of our solar system," Murphy continued. "And in exchange, we won't demonstrate our new weapons on your ships. We think that's pretty fair, considering you started this whole thing." The communication ended before Kethvar could respond. For the first time in 47 conquests, Commander Kethvar began to wonder if he had chosen the wrong species to threaten. 3 weeks after first contact, everything had changed. Dr. Lisa Grant stood in the newly built Human Defense Laboratory, watching her team work on technology that had seemed impossible just a month ago. Around her, engineers and scientists from every nation on Earth collaborated on projects that were advancing faster than anyone had believed possible. "Lisa, you need to see this," called out Dr. Emma White from across the room. She was hunched over a computer terminal, her eyes wide with excitement. "I've been analyzing the psychological patterns from the alien communications, and I think I understand what we're dealing with." Lisa walked over to Emma's workstation. On the screen were dozens of files containing recordings of alien communications, body language analysis, and behavioral patterns. "What did you find?" "They're not really warriors," Emma said, pulling up a chart. "Look at this. Every time we've responded differently than they expected, their stress levels have spiked dramatically. Their entire conquest strategy is based on psychological intimidation, not actual military superiority." She pointed to a recording of Commander Kethvar from their latest communication. "See how his posture changes when we don't react with fear? His voice patterns show increasing uncertainty. These beings have never had to actually fight a war. They've just been scaring other species into submission." Lisa studied the data. "So they're bullies." "Exactly. And there's nothing a bully fears more than someone who won't be bullied." Meanwhile, in space near Mars, Squadron Leader Nancy Kim led a patrol of 12 human fighter craft on their first real encounter with Zephyrian forces. The human ships were smaller and less advanced than the alien vessels, but they had one advantage the aliens had never encountered: pilots who treated combat like an adventure rather than a terrifying ordeal. "Contact ahead," reported her wingman, Lieutenant Tom Brooks. 3 alien patrol ships moving in standard formation." "I see them," Nancy replied, checking her weapon systems. The human fighters carried the new plasma cannons based on Dr. Martinez's improved designs, along with some traditional missile systems. "Remember, people, these guys have been conquering species for centuries. They're probably very good at this." "Copy. That lead," came the voice of pilot Sarah Johnson. "Should we try to look scared for them?" Laughter filled the communication channel. "Negative, Johnson. Let's see what happens when they fight someone who actually enjoys this." The alien ships detected the humans and immediately moved to attack. Positions. Their formation was precise and professional, exactly what military experts would expect from an advanced civilization. What they didn't expect was for the human pilots to start chatting casually over their open communication channels. "Hey, Nancy, think they know we can hear them breathing?" asked Lieutenant Brooks. "Probably not," Nancy replied, dodging an energy beam while simultaneously lining up her own shot. "Tom, remember that time you crashed your car into a lake because you were watching a bird?" "I was 16, Tom protested, launching missiles at an alien ship. "And it was a really pretty bird." "If you can crash into a lake watching birds, imagine what you'll do watching aliens," added Sarah, her fighter spinning through a series of evasive maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. The alien pilots, monitoring. The human communications found themselves listening to what sounded like a casual conversation between friends rather than desperate combat chatter. One human pilot was actually humming while dodging weapons fire. "Target the lead ship," Squadron Leader Nancy announced. "And remember, kids, these weapons are brand new. Let's see if Dr. Martinez was right about the power increase." The human fighters opened fire simultaneously. The improved plasma cannons lit up space with brilliant blue beams that struck the alien ships with devastating accuracy. 2 of the 3 alien vessels were destroyed immediately, while the third limped away with heavy damage. "Nice shooting, everyone," Nancy said cheerfully. "I think Dr. Martinez was being modest about those power ratings. Tom, you might want to work on your aim, though." "My aim was perfect. That ship moved just when I fired. Ships do that in combat, Tom. It's kind of the point. The surviving alien pilot listened to this conversation in complete bewilderment as he fled toward the main fleet. These humans had just destroyed 2 military vessels and were discussing it like a sporting event. Back on the Zephyrian flagship, Commander Kethvar received the report with growing alarm. Intelligence Officer Zexhai stood before him with a datapad full of disturbing information. Commander, we've lost 6 patrol ships in the last week, but that's not the worst news. What else? The humans have been studying our tactics during every engagement. They're not just fighting us, they're learning from us. And their technology is advancing faster than our intelligence department can track. Zexhai activated the main screen, showing footage from the recent battle. Watch their fighter formations. They're using techniques we've never seen before, mixing their own military doctrine with adaptations of our strategies. Kethvar watched the human pilots maneuver their ships in ways that seemed almost playful, while simultaneously outfighting experienced Zephyrian crews. There's more, sir. They're not just building better weapons, they're sharing them with other species. What do you mean? 3 days ago, a human ship appeared at the Kalari mining colony in the outer system. The Kalari have been under our control for 12 years. The humans offered them weapons and tactical support to rebel against our occupation forces. Kethvar felt his blood go cold. And the Kalari accepted. They drove our garrison off the planet yesterday. The humans didn't even participate in the fighting. They just gave the Kalari the tools and training they needed to do it themselves. The main screen switched to show recordings from other conquered worlds. On planet after planet, species that had been under Zephyrian control for decades were suddenly rising up. Human ships appeared at each world, not as conquerors but as liberators offering assistance to anyone who wanted to fight for their freedom. The humans are calling it Operation Freedom Ring, Zexhai continued. They're systematically visiting every world in our empire and offering military support to any species that wants independence. Mind-Render Yisketh approached with his own reports. Commander, I must report complete failure of our psychological warfare programs. We attempted to broadcast fear-inducing messages to the human population, but they've turned our own broadcasts into entertainment. Show me. The screen displayed a human television show called Alien Theater, where comedians performed dramatic readings of Zephyrian intimidation messages while audiences laughed. One segment showed a human actor dressed as a Zephyrian commander, delivering threats in an overly dramatic voice while children in the audience giggled. They're mocking us, sir, across their entire planet. Our most terrifying psychological weapons have become the basis for their comedy shows. Kethvar stared at the screen, watching human children laugh at dramatizations of Zephyrian threats. Something fundamental in his understanding of the universe was breaking down. Sir, the communications officer called out, "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Put it through." Captain Jake Murphy appeared on screen, flanked by Dr. Lisa Grant and Commander Rick Davis. Behind them, Kethvar could see what looked like a war room filled with humans working at computer terminals. "Commander Kethvar," Murphy said, his tone still friendly but now carrying an undertone of steel. "We've been thinking about your empire. It seems to us that you've been ruling through fear for a very long time." "The thing about fear," Dr. Grant added, "is that it only works as long as people believe you're more powerful than they are. But once they realize you're just another bully, well..." Commander Davis stepped forward. "We thought you should know that 17 of your former colonies have declared independence in the last week. We've been providing them with technical assistance and moral support. More importantly," Murphy continued, "we've been teaching them something very important, something you apparently never learned." "Which is?" Kethvar found himself asking, despite his better judgment. Murphy smiled, that same confident smile that had started this whole mess. "We've been teaching them how to laugh at bullies." The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with the growing realization that his empire was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For the first time in his life, Commander Kethvar understood what it meant to be afraid. 6 months after first contact, Captain Jake Murphy stood on the bridge of his ship as it approached the Zephyrian homeworld. Behind him traveled a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from 47 different species flew, together, all of them former colonies of the Zephyrian Empire that had declared their independence with human help. "Captain," Dr. Lisa Grant said from her station, "we're receiving communications from the planet. They're asking for terms of surrender." Murphy looked at the main screen showing the alien homeworld. It was a beautiful planet with purple oceans and silver cities that sparkled in the light of their orange sun. No human weapons were pointed at those cities. No threats had been made. Yet the entire Zephyrian government was ready to give up. "Tell them we're not here to conquer anything," Murphy said. "We just want to talk." Commander Rick Davis approached with a datapad. "Jake, you should see this. Intelligence reports that the Zephyrian military is in complete chaos. Half their fleet has deserted, and the other half is arguing about whether to fight or surrender. What about their civilians? That's the interesting part. According to our monitoring, most of the Zephyrian people never supported the Empire's conquests. They were just as much prisoners of their own government as the species they conquered." Murphy nodded. "Then let's go meet them properly this time." The human ship landed at the main spaceport of the Zephyrian capital city. As Murphy, Dr. Grant, and Commander Davis walked down the landing ramp, they were met by a small group of aliens. Commander Kethavar stood at the front, but he looked very different from the imposing figure who had first demanded Earth's surrender. His military uniform was gone, replaced by simple civilian clothes. His posture was no longer threatening, and his yellow eyes showed something that looked almost like relief. "Captain Murphy," Kethavar said, his voice quiet, "I must admit this is not how I expected our story to end." "It doesn't have to be an ending," Murphy replied, extending his hand in the human gesture of friendship. "It could be a beginning." Kethavar stared at the offered hand for a moment, then slowly reached out and took it. The gesture felt strange to him, but somehow right. "I don't understand," Kethavar said. "You've destroyed my empire, freed all my colonies, and defeated my military. Why aren't you demanding our surrender?" Dr. Grant stepped forward. "Because we learned something important about you. Your empire wasn't built on strength. It was built on fear. And once that fear was gone, there was nothing left to hold it together. But more than that," Murphy added, "we realized that you were trapped by your own system just as much as the people you conquered. How long has it been since your people were free to choose their own path?" Kethavar thought about this question. I don't remember. The Empire has existed for over 1,000 years. None of us have known anything else." Commander Davis pulled out a small device and activated it. Suddenly, the air around them filled with laughter. It was a recording from Earth, showing humans watching comedy shows, children playing, and people enjoying themselves without fear. "This is what we want to share with you," Davis said. "Not conquest, not submission, just the freedom to be happy." The small group of Zephyrians listened to the sounds of human laughter, and something remarkable happened. One of the younger aliens, a being named Veltar who served as Kethavar's aide, made a sound that was completely new to his species. He began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, then grew into full, hearty laughter. The other Zephyrians stared at him in amazement. They had never heard one of their own make such a sound. "I'm sorry," Veltar said, trying to control himself. "It's just, we spent all this time trying to be scary, and these humans just thought we were silly." Kethavar found his own mouth curving into what might have been a smile. "We did demand 60% of their resources," he said slowly. "That is rather ridiculous when you think about it." Dr. Grant grinned. "Especially since we barely know what to do with the resources we already have." More Zephyrians began to arrive at the spaceport. Word had spread that the humans had landed, but instead of an invasion force, they had brought teachers, doctors, engineers, and even comedians. The humans were setting up what they called a cultural exchange center. Murphy watched as Dr. Emma White began showing a group of young Zephyrians how human comedy worked. She played videos of stand-up comedians, cartoons, and funny movies. The aliens watched with fascination as they learned about this strange human concept called humor. "The thing about laughter," Dr. White explained to her audience, is that it's contagious. Once one person starts laughing, others usually join in. It brings people together instead of driving them apart. An elderly Zephyrian scientist named Corvesh raised his hand. But what purpose does this laughter serve? How does it help your species survive? It helps us survive because it helps us hope, Dr. White replied. When things get difficult, laughter reminds us that not everything is serious. It helps us see problems as challenges to overcome rather than reasons to give up. As the days passed, more ships arrived from across the galaxy. Former colonies of the Zephyrian Empire sent representatives to this new gathering. But instead of forming a new empire or seeking revenge, they created something unprecedented: a galactic community based on cooperation and mutual support. Dr. Lisa Grant established the first intergalactic comedy club in the capital city. Species from across the galaxy came to share their own forms of humor and learn from each other. The Kelari, it turned out, had a tradition of musical jokes. The Threnodi communicated humor through color patterns that flashed across their skin. Commander Rick Davis founded the Galactic Defense Cooperative, an organization dedicated to helping species protect themselves without conquering others. Instead of fear-based military dominance, it focused on sharing defensive technology and peaceful conflict resolution. But perhaps the most important change was in the Zephyrians themselves. Kethvar, freed from the pressure of maintaining an Yawa empire through intimidation, discovered that his people had their own capacity for joy. Zephyrian art, suppressed for centuries in favor of military efficiency, began to flourish again. One evening, as Murphy walked through the Zephyrian capital, he heard an unfamiliar sound coming from a nearby building. He looked inside and saw something wonderful: a group of Zephyrian children learning to laugh while playing games with human children who had come with the cultural exchange program. Kethvar approached and stood beside him, watching the children play together. I spent my entire life believing that strength came from making others fear you, Kethvar said quietly. But these children are showing more strength than my entire military ever did. How's that? Murphy asked. They're not afraid to be happy. Lo. Small Zephyrian child, no older than 7 in human years, ran up to them. She had been playing with a human girl about the same age, and both children were giggling. Uncle Kethvar, the young Zephyrian said, using the traditional term of respect for elders. Look what Sarah taught me. The child proceeded to tell a simple joke about a confused space turtle, complete with silly voices and exaggerated gestures. It wasn't particularly funny by adult standards, but the pure joy in her delivery made both Murphy and Kethvar smile. That's wonderful, little one, Kethvar said, his voice gentle in a way it had never been during his military career. The child beamed and ran back to her friends. Murphy and Kethvar watched as children from different worlds played together, creating their own games and sharing their own laughter. You know, Kethvar said, I think I'm beginning to understand why you weren't afraid of us. Why's that? Because you had something worth protecting that was stronger than any weapon. You had joy. Murphy nodded. And now you do too. As the sun set over the Zephyrian capital, the sound of laughter from many different species filled the air. It was the sound of a galaxy learning that there were better ways to live than through fear. And somewhere in the distance, a young alien child asked her parent the question that would define the new galactic age. Why were we ever afraid of laughter? The answer, of course, was that they never should have been. Laughter, as the humans had shown them, was not something to fear. It was something to share.